Hello everybody, this is Theo Cedar Jones, and I want to share with you my vision of the commons. But first I want to share with you some context of why I think the commons is important. Right now we're suffering some of the worst homelessness in California that we've ever seen. And it would seem that because of automation and because of COVID, there could be a lot more homeless people in the world and in America in the near future. The second aspect of what makes the commons so urgent is the fate of rock bands and rock music. And I've talked about this in other videos of mine. But before COVID, rock bands and the rock music industry was at its lowest point ever. And during COVID, we've seen a complete ending of live music. So rock is at its lowest point ever also. Now, the commons gives us an opportunity to redress a lot of social wrongs, a lot of environmental wrongs that no other aspect of society seems willing or able to handle. So I'm going to give you the Wikipedia definition of the commons. The commons is the cultural and natural resources accessible to all members of a society, including natural materials such as air, water, and a habitable earth. These resources are held in common, not owned privately. Commons can also be defined as a social practice of governing a resource, not by state or market, but by a community of users that self-governs the resource through institutions that it creates. So the commons is a European tradition. In England, Switzerland, Germany, and other places, not all of the land or resources always belonged to a monarch or a king or a feudal lord. There were areas of land, forest resources that were available to the residents for their use by agreement. And this notion of the commons is a social contract or an agreement among stakeholders in a given region to share those resources in a way that is equitable or agreeable to everyone concerned. This is without involvement of the state or private corporations. And what I would like to put forth is that society has suffered the lack of its third great component, that we have been looking towards the state or private corporations to answer issues of homelessness or lack of support for rock bands. But I believe that we really can't answer those societal problems without restoring the third great component of society, which is the commons, which is based on the empowerment of the people to self-govern a given area or body of resources together. Now, on September 3rd, 2020, I went down to an area of land in West Oakland, near the junction of Wood Street and Grand Avenue. It's really close to the edge of the bay, the Port of Oakland, and the 980 freeway. And this area of land has a large homeless encampment occupying a small portion of it. And I hung up a sign there on November 3rd, 2020 that says, Oakland Humane Commons. And I put an American flag under that, and I read a statement that includes this definition of the commons and some other values and goals. And in doing that, my goal was to formally establish that area of land as a permanent commons for the people of Oakland and the world, and to be a flagship example of what can be done in every city in America and every city in the world, which is to locate parcels of land that can ultimately be owned and operated by the people cooperatively and in common. And I believe we could start doing this at this plot of land that I call the Oakland Humane Commons in West Oakland. How can this solve the problems of homelessness and the collapse of the rock music industry? Well, as I've been writing about for the rock and roll block parties, I now realize that there are different types and flavors of the commons. The rock and roll block parties is part of this same movement towards the commons, but that's an example of a temporary commons where we expand the usable area for humans on the street in a neighborhood by getting a permit to temporarily block off cars to that area of neighborhood or that street, and then have our activities of live music, talent shows, food and beverages, and just the ability to hang out and socialize in the street, safe from the invasion of cars. After all, cars are the enemy of the commons. So that's an example of the temporary commons. But there's also an example of the permanent or 24-hour commons. And that's like any great public plaza is an example of that. The sidewalks are an example of that. Our sidewalks are one of the last vestiges of a 24-hour commons because many times city parks have a curfew. There's no overnight camping that's authorized in Oakland, for example, or any city that I visited. So overnight camping would be an example of 24-hour commons, not just temporary commons. And then there's a third kind of commons, which is residential commons. So you could have temporary use commons like a city park, but people aren't allowed to stay there overnight legally. And there's no place in the city for overnight camping or for homeless people to stay that's safe and legal. But that's the perfect job for the commons. So in addition to putting up a sign that declares and establishes the Oakland Humane Commons, I'm also building my own sod hut inside the Oakland Humane Commons with the other homeless people there. Because I'm about to be homeless, in a sense. I'm moving out of my house that I've lived in for 20 years due to having a crazed leftist living here, and due to COVID making it so that my housemates can't pay the rent and all the liability for that rent falls on me. So I'm forced to move out of this house due to COVID and crazed leftists. But this is an opportunity for me to find a way to realize my hopes and dreams to establish the beloved community amongst humanity, to really expand and co-create cooperative community on a local and a global scale with the Global Cooperative Forum. And living and working in the Oakland Humane Commons is a way for me to create the seed, establish the seed of something that will grow that third dimension of society and help heal the problem that because of what's called enclosure, corporations and the state have impinged unduly onto the people's commons and sucked up the real estate. And what we need to do is shake some of that real estate loose from private sources and shake some of it loose from the state and get really good at doing the things that are necessary to maintain a commons. And so what I plan to do to establish those necessities is to create my own sod hut and find a form of growing and making a livable architecture for the people that uses local resources, recycled materials, inexpensively made, and that helps people get back into sleeping on the ground, on the earth, and even in a cave-like structure that's in the earth. And this answers one of the great, terrible truths about urban life, is that it's been designed to be weaponized against human beings. And one of the ways that urban life is deliberately made to be anti-humane is noise, is the over-reliance on mechanical noise. So that if you're even living in a good neighborhood in Oakland, you're surrounded by automobile noise, truck and delivery truck noise, two-stroke engine noise from leaf blowers and gardeners and tree trimmers, and the ventilation noise of the buildings that we live in, the noise in the pipes from the water, the stomping of feet over your head, or the sounds of people living on top of you, next to you, underneath you, living in stick buildings, wooden hollow structures that resonate with the din and noise of constantly having people live too close together without the right kind of sound insulation. And there's nothing better for sound insulation than earth, dirt, mass. And we want to get people this inexpensive sod hut or earth ship architecture, which helps people live embedded partly in the earth, where it's quiet, where you're in the succor and solace of the embrace of Mother Earth. And you're protected from this din, this hideous, hostile noise of a mechanical, brutalist environment that's incessant, even in the wealthy neighborhoods. So our earth ships and our sod huts for the people, for the homeless, for those people who are on the edge of homeless, namely working musicians and artists, for example, and all those people who simply want to drop out of the rat race. Those are our three major constituents: the homeless, the struggling musicians and artists, and those people who simply want to drop out of the rat race. Start imagining your sod hut. Start imagining your earth ship here at the Oakland Humane Commons, because guess what? That commons is already yours. Yes, the space right now belongs to three different interests. The railroad tracks, which you don't even go near, is federal. The land under the freeway overpasses is Caltrans, and the additional land belongs to a private owner, who I know who that is, and I plan to be in good relationship with all those interests to help create a permanent Oakland Humane Commons that will afford homeless people, struggling artists and musicians, and those who want to drop out of the rat race, a place to rejoin the human race. The commons is where we regain access to each other. We step out of our cubicles and our cars and our brutalist skyrise living domiciles and have access to dirt, earth, and each other and growing things. So this commons answers potentially the issue of human social alienation, of lack of connection to the earth, of constant noise from the urban environment, and sheer homelessness. We must build and develop our commons in order to absorb the possible masses of people that are going to experience post-COVID homelessness, foreclosures, bankruptcies, and just plain being sick of their old lifestyle. COVID has woken up people to the fact that maybe they don't want to go back to their old lifestyle. They want something new. They need something to reconnect with basic survival, basic human connection. That is what the commons is really good at, is providing those necessities of human life that the state and the corporations, that's not their strong suit. We could provide that if we build the commons together. So the other great thing about the Oakland Humane Commons and every commons is that we can build a live sound stage. And because we're under the flippin' freeway, we can have live music in West Oakland featuring local bands 24 hours a day. and help to answer this hideous, horrible drought of all ages places to play. So I invite everybody to come down to Wood Street and Grand and check out the Oakland Humane Commons for yourself. It's trashed. It's dirty. It's not yet ready for kids because we have to get the syringes out of the soil. We have to pick up with magnets some of these hazards and then get the ground ready for our volunteers, our lovers of the commons, to descend on this place and see what is possible there. What do you want to do in the commons? We have room for playgrounds and a sweat lodge and water slides and BMX track and a skating rink and a kiva to have underground ceremonies and shrine to the dead and unused sculptures from Burning Man and art installations and a youth camp for runaway youth. I mean, all the unanswered needs that are constantly trying to pry their way into the little snippets of space left by the state or the private corporate interest. No, the commons is the answer to humanity's need for itself, its need for the earth and to get back to it. And here is what we have to remind ourselves. The reason why there's homeless people living on the sidewalk is because the sidewalk is the last vestige of all hours, 24-hour commons. And it's the only vestige of what you could call a residential commons in the inner city because it is criminal. It is unacceptable that there is no legal, dignified overnight camping for residents and travelers coming through Oakland or having, for whatever reason under God, are unable to house themselves, that they will never lack a dignified overnight camping spot or a dignified tiny home or sod hut or a tiny home on wheels, that we must provide those basic necessities of life to anyone who needs it. And when our Humane Commons is full, you're asking, yes, it's going to attract all these people who need services. We're going to expand the Oakland Humane Commons to other sites in Oakland, like Lake Merritt, like MacArthur Boulevard, that are desperately in need of a humanizing, socializing presence. And when people are living in the urban commons, their residential commons is inhabited, they become stakeholders in the safety of that space, in the beauty of that space. And if they are homeless people with mental issues or other issues, it is the humanizing influence of cooperative community and the commons that is the true healing for those people ultimately. And yes, we're going to need social services from the private and the state levels to help us build these commons. We're going to ask for help and participation and partnership with the state and with the corporate worlds to build this. And this is going to answer so much of their needs and their issues in life as well, because we cannot be fully human. We cannot enjoy our humanity fully. We cannot have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness fully without our commons being an equal sphere and domain to the corporate and the state spheres of life. And when we give a sufficient amount of space and resources to our residential commons, that is to say, places where people can sleep overnight legally with protection and safety and amenities, then we will stop misusing our sidewalks as residential commons. Sidewalks are now the only residential commons available. The parks have curfews. There's no place for overnight camping in the city. What is left for the people who, for whatever reason under God, have no place to sleep tonight? The sidewalk is the last vestige, and that's not right. That cannot stand. We must build our residential commons in Oakland, and the Oakland Humane Commons is the beginning of that process. So you don't need my permission or anyone's permission to start building your dream in the commons today. And I'm here to be your friend and to help anyone who wants to build the Oakland Humane Commons.